What's up everyone and welcome back to the World History Channel. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button today. Let's get started. The gruesome tale of how Europeans ate mummies for health. Medieval Europeans believed that medical cannibalism was the answer to all problems. Although it may seem absurd to eat mummies, this kind of medical cannibalism was promoted in Europe in the 15th century as a treatment for cancer, stomach problems, and headaches. Across the continent, embalmed bodies were prized for centuries for their alleged medical benefits rather than their historical significance. The surprising reason why people once craved and consumed mummies is as follows. How did people begin to consume mummies? The practice of eating parts of ancient Egyptian mummies and later embalmed corpses of all kinds is known as corpse medicine and dates back to the 11th century. According to historian Karl Dannenfeld, a series of misunderstandings and erroneous translations were the catalyst for everything. The bloody tale is centered on a single word: mumia. Mumia was a substance that seeped from black rock asphalt on a single Persian mountainside. It was prized for its healing properties. The substance that was used for a variety of medical purposes and gained a reputation in the Arabic world as expensive, precious, and effective, was named after the local word for wax. However, when Western Europeans first came into contact with the Islamic world and began translating its texts, a single error caused widespread confusion regarding the meaning of the word mumia. Dannenfeld claims that a number of translators from the 11th and 12th centuries incorrectly identified mumia as a substance that came from preserved bodies in Egyptian tombs. The similarity of the word mumia to the word mummy, and the fact that some ancient Egyptian mummies were embalmed with asphalt contributed to some confusion. Scientists now know that that method only made some mummies. However, mumia became associated with embalmed bodies rather than precious asphalt from a Persian mountain because Western Europeans, who were captivated by ancient finds in Egypt, went with the idea. Medical cannibalism. What is it? Medical misunderstandings and misinterpretations now combine with another erroneous but long-held belief that the human body contained healing power that could treat a variety of ailments. In an effort to improve their health, humans had practiced what is now known as medical cannibalism for generations. Medical cannibalism was alive and well in medieval Western Europe, from the belief that the blood of gladiators could cure epilepsy to the use of human fat in home remedies. The king's drops, a tincture made from human skulls, is said to have been consumed by King Charles II. Medical practitioners believed they had discovered a new source of healing products made from human body parts when the mumia, also known as the mummy, arrived. A run of mummies ensued after mumia was prescribed for everything from headaches to heart attacks. In a flash, conniving salesmen began collecting and selling mummies, as well as jewelry and pottery from ancient Egyptian tombs. Fake mummies were quickly traded because demand outpaced supply. In an effort to capitalize on the craze, body snatchers and unethical traders began turning fresh cadavers and the human remains of enslaved people, executed criminals, and others into mummies. One observer wrote that body snatchers would steal the bodies of those who had been hanged at night. The bodies would then be embalmed with salt and drugs, dried in an oven, and ground into powder that apothecaries would add to their home remedies. Egyptomania and the Victorian era. The fascination with mummies only increased as skepticism toward mumia grew over time. Egyptomania was so pronounced in England during the Victorian era that mummy unwrapping became a popular pastime in lecture halls and hospitals. When British men returned home from archaeological expeditions, colonial postings, or sightseeing tours with human mummies they had looted from Egyptian tombs, they were even held in private homes in the 19th century. Europeans continued to seek out mummies to satisfy their curiosity and provide components for medical treatments despite a ban on the export of antiquities. The use of mumia did not end until the latter part of the 19th century. Nonetheless, the fascination with ancient Egyptian remedies persists worldwide. Take a look at the skincare shelf at your local store to see that magic creams and other skincare products advertise with imagery from ancient Egypt as evidence. Although we no longer eat mummies or use medical cannibalism to stay healthy, the mystique of ancient Egypt persists. The disturbing narrative of how Europeans consumed mummies for health purposes stands as one of the most peculiar and disconcerting episodes in medical history. This account illustrates how a combination of linguistic misinterpretations, cultural misconceptions, and desperate efforts to discover cures for untreatable diseases culminated in the phenomenon known as medical cannibalism. In this practice, embalmed human remains ranging from ancient Egyptian mummies to freshly prepared corpses were ingested, ground into powder, and prescribed throughout Europe for centuries, treated as if they were miraculous remedies. To comprehend how such a grim practice could become accepted, one must delve into the medieval and Renaissance eras, where superstition, religion, and the burgeoning curiosity of proto-science intersected in often strange manners. The origins of this practice trace back to at least the 11th century, when Europeans, newly exposed to the Arabic-speaking world via the Crusades and expanding trade routes, began translating medical texts and discovering substances esteemed in the Middle East. Among these was mumia, a black tar-like resin or asphalt that naturally oozed from a Persian mountainside and was historically valued for its alleged healing properties, particularly as a treatment for wounds and internal ailments. However, a critical misunderstanding arose when European translators, lacking familiarity with the subtleties of Arabic language and enchanted by tales of Egyptian tombs, mistakenly conflated the term mumia, which refers to asphalt, with mummy, denoting a preserved corpse. This confusion was further exacerbated by the fact that certain ancient Egyptian embalming techniques did indeed incorporate bitumen in the mummification process. Consequently, when Western readers encountered the term, they erroneously deduced that the authentic source of mumia was not a geological secretion but rather the desiccated flesh of embalmed bodies, which appeared dark, resinous and tar-like. What was once identified as a mineral product became intertwined with human remains, paving the way for one of the most peculiar medical markets Europe had ever encountered. By the late Middle Ages, as plagues ravaged the continent and death loomed large, Europeans, in their desperation for cures, readily accepted the belief that powdered mummies could remedy ailments ranging from cancer and epilepsy to digestive issues and migraines. This belief was rooted in the medieval understanding that the human body possessed healing essences. Blood, fat, bone, and skin were all thought to have curative properties. Thus, consuming or applying body parts was seen as a means to harness another's vitality. This notion had historical precedents in Roman beliefs that the fresh blood of gladiators could alleviate epilepsy, in folk traditions asserting that human fat could heal wounds, and in numerous recipes for corpse medicine that circulated long before the mummy trade surged. When actual mummified bodies from Egypt began arriving at European ports, they were eagerly acquired by apothecaries, ground into powders, mixed into tinctures, and sold in glass jars as luxury remedies, often at exorbitant prices, transforming ancient remnants of a once great civilization into components for medieval and Renaissance medicine cabinets. The demand for authentic Egyptian mummies quickly exceeded the available supply, resulting in widespread fraud and substitution, with unscrupulous merchants fabricating fake mummies from recently executed criminals, enslaved individuals, or even freshly interred corpses, which they embalmed with pitch and salt, dried in ovens, and marketed as ancient artifacts. Meanwhile, body snatchers plundered gallows and graves under the cover of darkness, fueling a gruesome trade in counterfeit mummies that thrived across Europe, particularly in the apothecaries of Paris, Venice, and London, where powdered mummy was sold alongside herbs, spices, and minerals. At times, physicians prescribed it for a range of ailments, from internal bleeding to depression, while unscrupulous charlatans promoted it as a universal remedy. One observer noted that the corpses of those executed by hanging were particularly coveted, often stolen shortly after their execution and subjected to rudimentary mummification to facilitate their entry into the market. Consequently, the distinction between the ancient Egyptian dead and newly created corpses became indistinct in the European psyche, with both regarded as equally effective sources of healing. This belief stemmed from the idea that the preservation process, whether through natural asphalt or embalming, intensified the body's vital energies into a substance that could be transferred to the living. By the 16th and 17th centuries, medical cannibalism had become a recognized practice, accepted not only by apothecaries and the general populace but also by royalty and the aristocracy. A notable instance is King Charles II of England, who was reputed to have ingested the King's Drops, a tincture made from powdered human skull mixed with alcohol, which he believed contributed to his well-being. Additionally, other nobles and physicians recommended ground skull as a treatment for epilepsy, human fat as a remedy for joint pain, and mummy powder as a solution for headaches and heart conditions. demonstrating that this practice was not marginal but rather widely accepted, receiving endorsement from some of the highest social echelons in Europe. Concurrently, the intrigue surrounding Egypt intensified, as travelers, merchants, and scholars returned with stories of expansive necropolises and crypts filled with mummified bodies. Europeans perceived these not merely as cultural artifacts but as profitable resources for medical exploitation and collectors' interests. Indeed, the 17th and 18th centuries experienced a pronounced Egyptomania, during which mummies were extracted from their tombs and transported across the Mediterranean in crates, their remains destined for the tables of doctors, the jars of apothecaries, and even the palettes of artists. The pigment derived from ground mummies, referred to as mummy brown, was utilized in European painting well into the 19th century, representing a haunting transformation of sacred human remains into both artistic materials and medicinal products. Although skepticism regarding the efficacy of mummy medicine grew among certain physicians over time, the cultural momentum sustained the trade, bolstered by the persistent allure of the exotic and the desperate quest for cures in a world still plagued by disease. Even as the Enlightenment introduced more scientific methodologies in medicine, the practice of utilizing corpse medicine did not disappear abruptly, with powdered skulls and mummy flesh continuing to appear in prescriptions. The fascination with mummies gradually transitioned from strictly medicinal applications to broader cultural entertainment, culminating in the peculiar spectacles of the Victorian era, when mummy unwrapping parties became fashionable social gatherings in England. Wealthy hosts invited guests to observe the dramatic unwrapping of ancient linen in lecture halls, hospitals, or even private parlors, treating the millennia-old deceased as curiosities, trophies, or scientific specimens, while still, in some instances, extracting fragments for purported remedies. The popularity of such displays highlighted both the lasting Egyptomania in Europe and the profound intertwining of medicine, spectacle, and colonial exploitation. British expeditions returned with numerous mummies plundered from Egyptian tombs, disregarding the dignity of the deceased and the cultural importance of the remains, all under the guise of curiosity, science, or health. Although Egypt officially prohibited the export of antiquities in the 19th century, the demand for mummies continued, with smugglers and collectors persistently meeting this need. Consequently, for centuries, Europeans consumed, dissected, and exhibited the preserved bodies of ancient Egyptians alongside freshly embalmed corpses, firmly believing that within the dried flesh and bones resided solutions to ailments they could not otherwise remedy. Eventually, however, advancements in chemistry, medicine, and microbiology in the late 19th century made such practices obsolete, revealing the gruesome ineffectiveness of medical cannibalism and transforming the cultural significance of the mummy from a medicinal resource to an archaeological artifact. Nevertheless, the allure of ancient Egypt has never completely disappeared, continuing to thrive in contemporary popular culture, fashion, and marketing, with numerous beauty products and miracle creams still embellished with hieroglyphs and pyramids to evoke the timeless charm of Egyptian wisdom. This echoes the centuries when Europeans literally ingested the past in their desperate quest for health. Thus, the narrative of mummy consumption is not merely a gruesome curiosity but also a telling insight into the history of human desperation, misunderstanding, and fascination with the exotic, illustrating how easily errors can be enshrined in practice, the lengths to which individuals will go to preserve life, and how the legacy of ancient Egypt was once literally consumed by those who believed that within the dead lay the key to saving the living. A triumphant march from superstition to science, a linear progression from the follies of the past to the enlightened rationality of the present, is frequently portrayed as the history of medicine. The early modern European practice of medicinal cannibalism, which lasted from the late Middle Ages to the 18th century, and in which the most sought-after pharmaceutical ingredient was not a rare herb or a mineral spring but rather the preserved flesh of the human dead, specifically the ancient Egyptian mummy, challenges this neat narrative in a way that is both stark and disturbing. A gruesome illustration of a worldview in which the boundaries between magic and medicine, the sacred and the profane, the corpse and the cure, were terrifyingly porous. This was not a fringe belief of the ignorant peasantry but a mainstream, academically sanctioned therapy promoted by the most esteemed physicians, apothecaries, and alchemists of the time. The story of how Europeans came to grind up and eat their ancestors for health is a complicated tale of linguistic error, cultural miscommunication, the enduring power of ancient medical theories, the harsh economics of early global trade, and a profound alchemical belief that the human body was a reservoir of potent, transferable life force. This belief authorized a form of therapeutic cannibalism that would last for centuries, echoing our modern fascination with ancient Egyptian mystique in a faint but the bizarre journey begins on a single mountainside in Persia, not in Egypt's tombs, and is based on a crucial misinterpretation. The original mumia, also known as mumia or mummy, was a natural bitumen or asphaltum that came from the rocks of a particular mountain in Persia. It was black and tarry. This natural mumia was prized for centuries in Arabic medicine for its numerous therapeutic properties. It was thought to be a general panacea, an efficient anti-inflammatory, potent analgesic for wounds and fractures, and treatment for epilepsy and vertigo. The Persian word which means wax, was used to give it its name because of its consistency. This was the natural product known as mumia, which appeared in the medical writings of the Islamic Golden Age. It was rare, costly, and extremely effective. A catastrophic error occurred when Western European scholars began translating these Arabic medical texts into Latin, particularly in the vibrant translation centers of Sicily and Spain in the 11th and 12th centuries. These translators conflated the two when they encountered the word mumia, and possibly were aware of the Greek historian Herodotus' descriptions of Egyptian embalming practices that utilized pitch and resin. They came to the wrong conclusion that this potent healing asphalt was a human substance, the preserved remains of ancient Egyptian corpses that had been embalmed with such materials, not a mineral exudation from a Persian mountain. This error was strengthened by the linguistic resemblance between mumia and the later term mummy. In fact, while some Egyptian mummies were preserved with bitumen, which gave them a blackened, desiccated appearance that intrigued Europeans, many others were preserved with a complex combination of natron, resins, and oils. However, the error was total and irreversible. Mumia was no longer a form of rock oil. Rather, it was human flesh infused with the same magical, healing substance. European medical theory was uniquely prepared to make the conceptual leap from applying a mineral poultice to ingesting powdered corpse due to a deep belief in the concept of medical cannibalism. The transition from applying a mineral poultice to ingesting powdered corpse was vast. Long before the mistaken identity of mumia, European culture was steeped in the idea that the human body, particularly its most vital fluids and tissues, contained a powerful, transferable essence that could heal the living. This was a logical, if macabre, extension of the prevalent medical and spiritual philosophies, not the random superstition of a dark age. The basic idea was similia similibus curantur, or like cures like. The potent vitality of a strong, healthy, or tragically slain person could replenish a weak, bleeding, or failing individual. This belief system, now termed medicinal cannibalism or corpse medicine, had ancient roots. The Romans believed drinking the blood of slain gladiators could cure epilepsy, absorbing their strength and life force in a single gruesome draught. Relics, the remains of Christian saints whose physical bodies were believed to radiate miraculous healing power, were the subject of a thriving trade throughout the medieval era. The veneration of relics was spiritual, but the distinction between a sacred miracle and medical care was frequently muddled. More directly, preparations made from human ingredients were on the shelves of apothecaries and in books on home remedies. Usnea, the moss that was removed from the skull of a man who had been hanged and left to swing in the elements, was a prized ingredient that was used to treat epilepsy and nosebleeds. Salves and ointments used to treat gout, wounds, and rheumatism frequently used human fat, which was frequently obtained from executed criminals. Executors frequently sold this grisly product directly to the public. Epileptics and other patients seeking a direct vitality transfusion sometimes collected and drank the blood of recently executed individuals. In order to comprehend how mumia are received, this context is essential. European physicians did not perceive this new substance as a bizarre foreign practice when they learned of it, armed with their mistranslated Arabic texts. They saw a more potent, exotic, and probably effective version of the corpse medicine they were already familiar with and used. Mumia became the ultimate drug for the dead because it was ancient, preserved in bitumen and mysterious spices from the East, and thus infused with concentrated life force and medicinal virtue. The demand for genuine Egyptian mumia had spawned a full-fledged international commodity trade by the 15th and 16th centuries, a sinister precursor to the modern pharmaceutical industry. It became a standard entry in official pharmacopoeias and was expected to be stocked by apothecaries in Europe, from London to Leipzig. It was recommended by well-known doctors like Francis Bacon, the father of empirical science, and Paracelsus, the father of toxicology.